Hi, welcome back. As you may be aware, I've done a couple of videos so far on personal security, how to kind of keep yourself safer on the streets, that kind of thing, and it's very far removed from the usual Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal nonsense out there. It's kind of real world stuff and trying to take a bit more of a common sense approach to things. Now, with that in mind, I've had a few people in the comments talking about, could I do something on conflict resolution? Maybe you work in security, or maybe you're a customer of a club, or prospective customer, and you're wondering why security do some of the things they do, or maybe even how to select a club that's safe based on how the security staff are behaving. And this isn't a straightforward subject. People imagine you can just write a handbook of this is how you behave to do security, this is the safe way to do things. And unfortunately, nothing's ever that simple. That's why it is, in effect, quite a difficult job to do. And you see both police and security guys struggling in this regard, especially these days. That's because people have tried to turn the training into this one-size-fits-all manuscript, which everyone can read and suddenly become an expert in deconfliction. And that is kind of nonsense. You have to have a little bit of a deeper understanding of some of the issues and the context of the situation. So let's have a think about the context of the situation first, and let's have a think about what your basic job is as a security guy. And we're talking about front of house security here, clubs, pubs, that kind of thing. Funnily enough, most security guys don't even think about what their job actually entails. They just think, I'm doing security, but what does that actually mean? And that can even mean different things at different places. There may be some places that require a very high level of actual security. They want to make sure that there aren't terrorist attempts on the place, that they're checking for things like bombs, weapons. They've got high profile guests in these places, and that is the kind of highest level of security you might be doing. Then you go right down to a pub or a club that simply has a insurance requirement for some security guys, and they don't even care about the level of security you're offering. All they care about is that you're wearing an SIA badge, you're wearing a jacket, and you're stood somewhere in the right place, therefore ticking a box on a sheet. And that's kind of what we see a lot, at the front of Tesco's and stuff like that, and commonly why these places are getting robbed blind, and the security guys are simply stood there because they're actually told by their employers, don't touch anyone, don't do anything, you're just there as a visible deterrent. So you have to work out what the expectation is of you. And I'm going to be talking here about your pubs and clubs, and I'm going to hope you're working for someone who actually wants you to provide a level of security. So the context of the place is important. What type of venue is it? What kind of clientele are you expecting? And always remember this, you're working for a private venue. It's a private business. You can let in or turn away anyone you like. It's a private business. No one's entitled to come into your private venue. It's private property. You can stop them from coming in, and you can do that for anything you wish, as long as you're not doing it for some sort of prejudice reason. So you can't say to someone, I don't like your ethnicity, so you're not coming in, or you look like you're the wrong kind of sexuality, I don't like the look of you, you're not coming in. But if they don't fit the requirements of that evening, then you're more than able to tell them that actually it's not the appropriate night for them. So if I was working in an upmarket piano bar and 10 guys turn up from a football match down the road and they're wearing Stone Island and swigging bottles of Beck's in the street, I'm not going to let them in because they're unsuitable for that venue. They're going to make the clientele inside feel uncomfortable. People have paid probably quite a lot of money and they're buying expensive drinks and stuff. They don't want a bunch of guys sitting swearing and shouting about the football match they've just watched. At the same time, that would work the other way round. If I was running a pub that was heavily football focused and it had an England game playing and a middle class wine tasting group turned up and they wanted a very quiet and quaint time, then I would be telling them, actually, this isn't the venue for you. You know, we've got a football match going on. The guys are all shouting and swearing in there. It's not going to be suitable for you. And that's actually one of the biggest issues I've seen in door work, is the doormen don't have confidence. And they also don't understand that they do not have to let everybody in. You know, you don't need a really good reason to stop someone coming in. That's what a lot of the customers say. They say, hey, I haven't done anything, you can't stop me from coming in. Actually, that's incorrect. And I would suggest being completely transparent and honest with that, because being dishonest on the door in any type of security, it always leads to trouble. And that's something I see loads and loads of new security guys do, or people that lack confidence. They start to make up lies. And I'll give you some examples. So a bunch of guys turn up at the door and they don't look like the kind of guys you really want to let in. They're behaving in an intimidating way. They're quite aggressive. And a naive doorman will say something like, oh, we're not letting anyone in at the moment, mate. Now these guys will then stand across the road, smoking and drinking, watch over at your door. And as soon as you start letting people in and out, they're going to come back. And they're going to say, why have you just let people in and out? And what are you going to tell them? Now you've told this lie, you're going to have to tell them more lies. They're going to know you're lying. If these guys are pretty predatory, they've seen people lie to them before. They've worked that out already, and they can see you kind of stuttering and getting nervous. They know you've just made that up to kind of stop them getting in. So now they're going to be more and more and more of a pain in the arse. They're going to elevate that situation until it actually turns into some sort of conflict. It would have been far better. I always handled it by being completely honest. 10 guys would turn up. They were looking pretty rough and ready and a bit aggressive. And I would say, guys, it's not the scene for you tonight. It's not the venue. I've got a lot of quiet, pleasant people down there. You guys look like you're out for a pretty rowdy evening. This isn't what I want in this venue. And I'm trying not to be offensive, right? Because there's being honest and there's being honest. You know, I don't want to tell them that their bum looks big in these pants kind of thing, you know, but at the same time, I don't want to be dishonest with them. And if they press me, I will get more and more honest. So if they say, what do you mean we're out for a rowdy night? I'm going to say, look, boys, you come up the road, you were kind of all swaggering down the road, your mannerisms kind of aggressive. I know that each time I kind of tell more of the truth to them as they want me to, they're not going to particularly like it. So I'm trying to withhold as much as possible. I'm trying to make them realise I've got enough confidence on that door not to let them in. I've got enough confidence to be completely honest about why I'm not going to let them in. Most of the time that's enough. The other classic that I see with people is that they'll make up stuff about dress code. You know, that was always a cringe factor for me, that guys would turn up and the doorman would say, mate, you have to wear dress shoes only tonight. You can't wear trainers. And it's like so cliche. And then the guys would stand outside, of course, and they'd be moaning to each other about the shoes. And then one of the staff or one of the customers would wander out the venue and they're wearing trainers. So immediately the guys go, why is that guy wearing trainers? Again, you've stitched yourself up. You've told a lie. Now you're kind of having to tell more lies and say, oh, but the staff are allowed to wear trainers and again, you're opening up this kind of two-way conversation. You want to shut down a two-way conversation if you don't want to let someone in. Because if people have bad intentions, they've got like a gameplay in mind. You know, they've already worked out, probably even before they've walked out the door. A lot of them are very narcissistic, so they want attention. And they've got this game in mind in their heads where there's going to be these conversations going on. And if you think about it, we all do that. You might think, I'll give you an example. You think, I'm not happy at work for some reason. I'm going to go and talk to my boss. And in your mind, before you do that, you have the conversation with your boss, right? You think to yourself, well, I'm going to walk in his office and he's going to say, how are you doing? Then I'm going to say to him, oh, actually, I'm not happy. Then you're going to kind of play that situation out. You're going to role play it in your head. These guys are going to do exactly the same thing. And the idea is that you don't play into that. You know, you don't want to fulfill what's already in their role play, because the end game in their role play is normally them beating you up. So you don't want to keep playing into that kind of tit for tat game that they've already developed in their head. You've got two options. You can say something that's not within their script, which is often the truth, you know, because they don't expect you to say that, or you can do something that's not within the script. So saying something, like I said, you can tell them the truth. They won't be expecting you to do that. It's surprisingly rare in security for people to tell the truth. I even used to tell people, you know, sometimes guys turn up and girls and you just don't want them in. They give you a kind of feeling, and I'm always listening to the feelings that I get about situations. You know, we have that for a reason, and you might not be able to quite put your finger on it. It's something about their body language, something about the way they look, and you just think to yourself, you know, this guy makes me feel really uncomfortable. You should listen to that, and you think, well, what can I tell this person? I used to tell him exactly that. I'd say, there's something about you that makes me feel very uncomfortable, and therefore I'm not comfortable letting you in. And they would go, well, that's ridiculous. You can't just not let me in because you feel uncomfortable. And I say, actually, I can do that, and I am going to do that. So sorry, go somewhere else, you know, and maybe try again next week. And if they came back next week and I had the same feeling, I would say the same thing. Sometimes I would change my opinions. When you challenge someone like that and tell them the truth, if they stay there and they talk to you and they put your mind at ease, then maybe they've got a good chance of getting in. You know, I've had the same thing with me. I can look maybe like a person who a doorman wouldn't want to let in. And I've gone to different places in the country before when I was younger and a bit bigger and a bit meaner looking, and I turned up at pubs and clubs with a group of guys or whatever trying to go out for the night, and the doorman would say, I don't know you, mate, you know, you're not coming in. And I knew why, because I looked unsavoury. And so I'd talk to the doorman and I'd say, oh, that's no problem, buddy, you know, I understand. I get this quite a lot when I go up to doors. I always get knocked back, probably because I've got a bald head and I look a bit rough or whatever, but actually I'm not rough. I would start talking maybe about some work that I did. Sometimes I would start talking that I did security work, but I kind of avoided that because you get a lot of bullshitters that do that, you know. So, oh mate, I do the doors as well. Like, it's a very cliche thing to say. So I kind of used to avoid that. I would just talk about a few bits and bobs for the day, you know, no big deal, but just be nice, be myself. And a lot of the time the guy would say, actually, dude, you know, I made the wrong judgment about you. You're sound, you can come in. And they didn't live to regret that, because I was good when I was in there. I'd go up to them and say if I'd seen anything dodgy going on, and I was generally quite an asset to them if I was in one of those places, and they were quite happy that I was in there after a while. Now, you have to weigh that up, of course, against the commercial aspect of this. And the commercial aspect is you're working at a venue that needs people to come in the front door. And I've worked in some venues where there's a lot of pressure from the managers and the bosses because they might be on performance bonuses, and there's huge pressure for you to let just everyone in, you know, especially in a really busy nightclub. They just want the crowds to stream through the front door, everyone pay, everyone come in, and then we'll sort of worry about the problems that occur later. That is always a terrible strategy. So not only do you have to be honest and confident when you're talking to the customers, you also have to be honest and confident when you're talking to the managers and promoters and all the other people that are in clubs. You know, if your boss says to you, you've got to just let everyone in and don't even stop and talk to anyone, I'd be saying to him, that's not going to happen. You know, and if it came to it, I'd look for a different job. Because don't forget, it's your face and your knuckles that will end up going to get broken at the end of that night. And they are going to get broken if you just let 1,000 people through the door without checking anyone, without doing any sort of due diligence. Some of those people are going to be really unpleasant. You will soon develop a reputation as a guy that's, you know, formidable, trustworthy, dependable, and is offering a good level of security. So the places that are worth working at will want you to work there, and the places that are, you know, cheap, 2 bob, waste of times, then yeah, they're not going to want you, and you don't want to work there anyway. Now, I have worked at some places where there's kind of an issue with those two facts crossing over, that in some places I've had some sort of nights that have been on where it's become really, really difficult. So a good example would be like R&B nights, grime nights, stuff like that. that I would say 70 to 80% of the clientele that happened to be attracted to that kind of music were generally not the kind of people that I would traditionally want to let into a venue, because a lot of them were straight up drug dealers. You know, they were clearly serving up. They showed all the signs of like being in gangs, and I would be saying to the manager, yeah, these aren't really the greatest of people, and he would go, yeah, but it's like a grime night, so what, you know, what are we going to do? That's literally who the audience is. If you don't like that concept, don't work those nights. I worked some really, really rough nights in London doing stuff like that. You know, guys wearing ballistic vests. I remember a guy got shot on one of the nights we were there. I've been at venues where someone's driven by and just put shots out the window of a vehicle as it's come by the front doors because they got some beef with someone inside or whatever. So they can be really rough gigs, and you're maybe not going to have the ability to kind of turn people away. I would say for those kind of gigs, the front door guy really needs to be someone who's immersed in that sort of culture, because that's not my scene. You know, I'm not into all that music and that culture, so I'm not the best person to kind of make judgments on who's who within that local culture. And I would be getting there for a local doorman who was immersed in that scene, who did know all the characters were, and then he's going to be able to make choices about who to let in, whether people are rivals with each other. You know, you might be able to let one group in and they kind of get on fine and have a good night, but you know from local knowledge, if you let another one in and they're, you know, beefing with those guys or whatever, then it's all going to kick off. So you really, really need that extra information for specialist nights like that. And the same might be said for sporting events. You know, if you were running a pub and you had a bunch of football guys come in, I'm not a big football guy. I wouldn't have a clue, you know, which clubs get on with which clubs and which don't. I would be a bad person to be running a pub on a, you know, a derby day when there were certain games being played or whatever. I wouldn't have a clue which supporters were which. I would just be letting them in, and that would obviously end in tears. So you've got to be honest about your knowledge and abilities, and if you're weak in those areas, it actually shows confidence to admit that. You know, don't pretend that you're like an expert in every single thing to do with security, because there's going to be some really niche areas where you're simply, you know, you're out of your depth. You might be able to imagine the security side of it, but you don't have any of the kind of inside information for that event or that culture or that sport or whatever it is to make an informed decision on it. So you need sort of inside info for that. You need to get someone who does know. Now, the thing most people want to know, like, what do you do when someone kicks off? How do you stop that? Now, I've talked about this before. You know, not all kickoffs are the same. The ones that are the hardest to deal with and are the most concerning are ones that you don't see coming, that the guy doesn't appear to be a problem, because if he's a problem when he comes to the front door, you're probably not going to let him in, right? We've just ascertained that. One of the best things you can do is just filter those guys out to start with. But if they're already in and they suddenly kicked off and you weren't expecting that, then those are the biggest issues, because there's some people that can just flip like a switch. You know, in 1 minute they're just normal, they're having a good time, and then something really irks them and they absolutely go nuts and they suddenly become incredibly violent. Very hard to predict, very hard to stop that happening, because you need to be able to step in first to stop something happening. And if you're not aware of any sort of indicators that that's about to happen, how can you step in? There's no preventative measure you can take. Luckily, that's incredibly rare. Those kind of incidents probably made up, I don't know, like 5% of all the incidents I ever dealt with. There were a lot of incidents where the doorman would say to me, suddenly this flared up. But actually, if you people watch, they didn't suddenly flare up. You know, you saw two groups of guys walking into the same area of the club. There's some girls with those guys. Some of the guys are looking over at the girls on the other side with the other guys. You know, like, it doesn't take a brain of Breton to work out, those guys aren't going to like that very much. And then you kind of start seeing them all staring at each other. We know how this is going to play out. Not always. Sometimes those guys all become best mates and they all go off and have a big laugh together. But a lot of the time it doesn't work out like that. So you've got to be a good people watcher. And when you start seeing things like that build, you need to go and put yourself in the middle of it. You know, you need to go over there before the problems start. one of the biggest issues I used to see in security was that doormen used to sort of take a step back, lean against a wall, chewing gum, looking at girls dancing or whatever, chatting away to someone about something completely different, not paying attention to the club. And then suddenly they would get a call on the radio, there's a fight, and they would think the job is to like run in, deal with this fight, and then there's a great big load of violence, everyone gets dragged out. That's bad for the club, it's bad for the customers in the club, it's bad for the doorman because they're going to have to break their knuckles and maybe get beaten up in the process. It's bad for the people in the fight. You've allowed them to kind of escalate things so far that now they might end up being physically damaged by each other or by the door staff when it all kicks off. And that needn't have happened, you know, you could have stopped that. So if you're a good people watcher and you're pretty good with body language and a bit of sort of amateur psychology, then you can kind of go over there and start chatting to the guys. And I don't mean like walk over in the middle and start refereeing or anything, but just have an amicable chat, gauge their mood. You know, if they start saying, well, them guys over there have come in, they're eyeing up my girl and whatever, you can start mitigating some of that. Dealing with people that are drinking alcohol is incredibly easy. You know, hopefully you are sober if you're the door person. They're all drunk most of the time. At least they've had a couple of drinks. And all you've got to do is kind of placate them, maybe manipulate them a bit, you know, manipulate them to a different area of the club. Give them a reason to go to that area. You know, I even used to do things like there would be a group of guys in a bar on one side of the club had multiple bars, let's say. They were eyeballing some other guys. I could see it would be kicking off, and I'll go up to the guys and say, hey, I haven't seen you here before, you know, I'm the doorman, how's it going? And they say, yeah, not bad. And I can see that they've got some grief with these other dudes, and I say, look, you know, this bar's a bit busy, but we're trying to get some people in the other bar, and I'll tell you what, I'll buy all you guys a drink. And I buy everyone like a half a beer or whatever. So it's going to cost me, back in them days, it was like £1.50 each. Probably a bit more now. But to me, that was worth it, right? And I'd even take that out of the club funds. Maybe you can't do that anymore. But a few times I even did it out of my own money, because I don't want 20 guys kicking off in a club with another 20 guys. That is a seriously dangerous situation. I can alleviate that by giving it like a win for them, you know, make them feel a bit special. You can even manipulate them saying, look, we're opening up another bar, or the other bar's like supposed to be VIP, but you guys look sound, you got some real pretty girls with you, bring them along, you know, you can come into the VIP section. Whatever it is to move them to somewhere else so they're not sitting there eyeballing these other dudes that they've been having a problem with. There's loads and loads of techniques you can imagine like that. Try to drop your ego, because it's so tempting for doormen to go up to dudes and say, right, you lot, move over there. You know, I don't want you standing there looking at these guys or whatever, and trying to force them. Now, especially if they've had a few drinks, you know, if you've ever dealt with your wife or girlfriend when she's had a few drinks and she's been super belligerent to you and you're saying, oh, we got to go now, and she's like telling you to get lost, and you have this kind of pointless argument that just gets worse and worse, because drunk people do not like being told what to do. You've got to kind of nicely guide them to the taxi. They're not going to leave when you demand them. So drop your own ego. You know, dropping your ego on purpose isn't like a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you know what you're doing. You don't go around throwing your weight around for no particular reason. I've never seen a situation where security guys have kind of gone up to someone and start bossing them around and chucking their weight about, which didn't end badly. And maybe the security guys got their own way, maybe they got those people out of the club, but they would have done it in some kind of unpleasant, aggressive, violent manner, which is bad for the club and bad for everyone in the club. And they could have done it without any of that. You know, that's the problem. Sometimes you have to use levels of aggression when suddenly, like I said, there's that unexpected issue that immediately happens and you have no forewarning whatsoever. In that case, you're going to have to grab someone and get them removed from the club. But in 95% of cases, that isn't what's happening. You've had lots and lots of little indicators that there's going to be something that's occurring, and you've had lots of chances to go up without an ego and just lay the groundwork to stop that happening. It's just application of a little common sense and being a bit humble and giving these guys a win-win situation. And that win-win situation is really important, you know, especially when you're dealing with people that are drunk. There would be so many times where people would be in front of their friends and they would say, you know, to me, oh, I'm going to kick your head in. I could easily beat you up. And I would say, yeah, you probably could. You got a load of your friends with me. You know, I'm stood here. I've got none of my mates with me. And you're all pretty angry. I'm not particularly that angry. So you probably got a pretty good chance of all beating me up. And you're not playing into that kind of prologue that I spoke about earlier, because they're expecting me at that point to say, you couldn't beat me up, you know, I'm going to beat you up, or something along those lines of escalation. I'm going to try not to escalate, you know, and I'm going to tell them, yeah, maybe you could beat me up, but you can say that with confidence, you know, and you can say, maybe you can beat me up, but unfortunately my job is to stand here and I can't let you back in because you've been removed for X, Y, or Z, and I cannot do anything about that. So even if you can beat me up, I'm still going to have to stand here and do my best. And a lot of people are opportunists. Most people don't want to pick the road that's the hard road. If they've got an option to just intimidate you a bit, talk shit in front of their mates, you know, make you look a bit small or whatever, and then they can walk off giving it the Conor McGregor arm sway as they swan off down the road to the next club, they're more than happy. So you give them that win. It doesn't matter, you know, it's not a denigration on your character if they walk away like that. I remember working with a guy, his name was Mike, and he was a very tough guy, really good boxer, very fast hands, and he was genuinely a very, very skilled fighter, and he had a really, really short fuse. He used to hate people kind of getting one over on him. And I was always on at him, you know, to be a bit more zen and kind of calm, because obviously we couldn't have trouble at some of the venues we were working at. Mike would sort of grit his teeth, you know, and people would be swearing and shouting, and he would be gritting his teeth. And I would kind of see him and I'd think, oh God, you know, is he going to hit him? Is he not? And I'd sort of see his, you know, like shoulder muscles twitching, because I could see him sort of thinking about lining them up as they were getting more and more aggressive. And he would be good, and he would say, you know, they were good, I didn't hit them, nothing bad happened. And as these guys walked off, I would sort of jokingly say to him, I can't believe you let those guys, you know, talk to you like that. You know, they proper mugged you off. And he would go absolutely ballistic, and he would like try and run off down the road to get hold of these guys, and I would sort of grab him from behind and pick him up, and his legs would be like going, and I'd be laughing, you know, kind of saying, no, don't do anything, I'm joking. But that gives you an idea of how it bothers people, you know, that it's really, really difficult to have people that are clearly drunken idiots. Most of them can, you know, fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And especially if you're pretty handy, you're training, you know, you're doing all the right things, and you've got some absolute mug telling you all this stuff and telling you what he's going to, you know, do to your mum and all this kind of thing. It's really difficult to stand there and take some of that and kind of let him have that win-win situation. But it is the most sensible thing. I used to very much have a mentality of Bushido when I was working, which was, I'm in the service of my employer, and my employer wants me to do X, Y, and Z. So up to the letter of the law, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for him. And what I do know is most of my employers didn't want me to just batter everyone on the front door that said something rude about my mum, because then they would have a very, very bad club with a bad reputation. The police would try and shut it down. No nice customers would want to come there because there's blood splattered all up the walls in the hallway. Who's going to want to go into that club, right? So I'm not doing him any favours, and ultimately that's what I'm there for. I'm working for that guy. So I tried to apply the principle of the samurai, which was you do basically what your master tells you to do. Now that had some caveats, because sometimes your bosses will tell you to do something that's completely unlawful, and you need to understand enough about the law to know what you can and can't do. So examples of that were commonly, I remember bosses would tell me, I don't like people standing outside the front of the venue. They're making it look untidy. And he was talking about people standing up and down on the pavement outside the front of a club. Now, we didn't own that pavement. That's council property. And I don't really understand what he would expect me to do about that. He would say, go and clear them all off the pavement. Well, unfortunately, I can't, because it's a public area. So I can go out and say to people, oh, would you mind, we need, to get access in and out of here, would you mind moving out the way? And I would say to them, I realise it's a pavement, I've got no jurisdiction out here, I'm just asking you all kindly if you wouldn't mind. Generally, people were pretty good. And then same thing, I remember working in an Italian restaurant. I had this great security job for about a year. I worked in an Italian restaurant. The guy who owned it was Sicilian. He was like dating page 3 models. He was about 75. And Pietro, his name was. Big fat Italian guy, very old fashioned, used to sit in the corner. I'm pretty sure he was kind of dodgy, thinking back about it. But part of this deal was that I would get any item off the menu that I wanted for dinner. So I would just sit there from 6 in the evening till about 11 at night. I didn't really have to do anything. I just made sure the customers weren't kicking off, because he had a couple of customers that had tried to beat him up. And all I had to do was sit down. I would read a newspaper, read a magazine, and then I'd get free drinks and anything off the menu. But he used to come out with some crazy stuff, like a van driver, delivery guy, parked outside the front of the restaurant, and he had been in the van for 5 minutes. He'd obviously checking his phone or reading something. So the Italian owner says, I don't like that van out there, it makes the place look untidy. And I said, well, it's parked in the road, I can't do much about that. And he said, well, you're my security man, I want you to do something about it. And I said, well, what can I do? It's just a public road, it's not double yellows, the guy's perfectly legit to park there. And he said, I want you to drag him out the van and punch him in the face. He said, that's how I expect the security staff to act. And I had to explain to him, I'm not a gangster's minder, and I have to kind of obey with what the law is. I can't just go beating people up. It's not Goodfellas. And if he wanted it to be Goodfellas, then he would have to pay me a lot more than £15 an hour. I'm pretty sure gangsters get paid a lot more than £15 an hour. One would hope so. So know what's expected of you. Know what you can legally do and what you can't. Try not to step out of those boundaries. Understand the context of the situation. Understand that you may not even want to work in that context. If it's a club that's completely alien to you and the whole culture of that night is completely alien to you, it might not even be worth you working it. So think along those lines. Hopefully there's quite a lot there to kind of give you some basic tips on deconfliction, on preventing problems in clubs and pubs. And hopefully if you're a customer, that's kind of given you some inkling. I've had a few people that have messaged and they say, hey, why do doormen always make up stuff about shoes, or why don't they let us in when we're in a group? I mean, the group thing is a classic. Doormen don't let in big groups because there's only a handful of doormen at most clubs. You might have, say, a reasonably sized club that holds 1,000 people, might have 5 doormen or 10 doormen. Those 10 doormen can't fight 1,000 people. They can't even fight 50 people. They can't fight maybe 20 people. So if you're turning up and you're 15, 20 guys, and the doormen have to look after 1,000 people, there's no way that they want to let you in, because they're gonna, if you guys kick off, you've completely tied up the whole door team, and it's got a good chance that you could overrun the door team. And if that happens, you've now got a club with 1,000 people that are basically unmonitored, and it's out of hand. I've said this before, it's like trying to run a prison. You've got only a few prison guards and you've got lots and lots of prisoners. You have to be a bit clever about the psychology of running that place. So you simply don't let in huge groups. I would always be against letting in rugby teams, football teams, especially those sports where people tend to get super drunk and there's kind of levels of aggression. Rugby fans, really good. Rugby players, not so good. They used to like to fight as soon as they had a few beers. Football fans, bit of a problem. Football players, not so bad. They kind of get entitled and annoying, but they don't particularly like to fight. So understand some of that as well. You know, you'll learn that with experience, that there's some groups that maybe you can let in. If it's the local bell ringing society or the choir, probably you can let a group in. If it's the lads who race around in boy racer cars parked in Tesco's car park and there's 20 of them, probably don't let them in. You know, you get the gist. You can kind of use your brain a bit on that. But that's why groups are fairly unpopular. And the clothing thing, that's normally, as I said before, when you've got doormen that lack confidence and they're trying to utilise like ridiculous stuff to stop people coming in. I actually saw this one night. I remember working at a place in Brighton Marina, and I was working with someone who wasn't particularly competent or confident. And I was inside the club, and as I was walking out, they said to this group, you can't come in, you can only wear shoes in here. You know, you're wearing trainers, you got to put your shoes on. The trouble is, there was an Asda over the road, and it was literally 3 minutes away, a big superstore. So these guys just walked to Asda. They all bought a pair of Georgia Asda shoes, which were like $8.99 each. And then they put them straight on, walk back to the club, and then they say, right, I want to come in. I had to step in and say, actually, guys, I don't want you in. Now I've got the added problem that they're trying to bill me $8.99 each for the shoes they've just bought. And I said, look, I don't care. He was the one who told you about the shoes. I'm not telling you about shoes. I'm just telling you I don't want you in because you give me a bad vibe. You know, I think you're going to kick off. I don't trust you, and you're going to go somewhere else. And then I point them in the direction of somewhere else, and they cursed and sweared, and they weren't happy with me, but they disappeared. But that gives you an idea of what can happen. You know, people who really want to get in the club, they will go home and get some shoes and come back, and then you're left with the same problem again. So that's why the clothing and shoe thing generally goes on. The doormen just don't know how to put things, you know, they don't know how to tell the truth to people. They haven't got that confidence, so they're trying to turn people away with rubbish excuses, basically. I hope that was useful for everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any more interest in kind of niches in security that I might be able to help with, leave them in the comments. I will do my best to answer anything, or possibly make another video on the subject if it's a topic that warrants it. Thanks for watching. Take care. Catch you next time.